Try as you might, there is no way to prepare for every single word that might show up on test day. With estimates at well over 150,000 words in the English dictionary currently, and more being added every year, there is simply no way to prepare for it all. So, how can you be ready for the vocabulary and context questions that are asked on every passage of the TOEFL? I'm Danielle from GetTestObsessed.com, and in today's video, I will teach you what to do when you find a vocabulary word on the TOEFL reading section that you don't know. With these tips, you'll go into test day more confident and be able to make a more educated guess when you inevitably encounter a word you've never seen before on the actual test day. What I'm going to teach you today should not be used in lieu of memorizing TOEFL vocab. Having a solid background in vocabulary is essential on this exam. But realistically, even with a great vocab list and an above average memory, you will still probably run into words on test day that you aren't familiar with. And, more likely than not, the TOEFL is going to ask you about the definition of that particular word in a vocabulary and context question in the reading section of the exam. The good news is that the format of the TOEFL is actually advantageous to test takers in a number of ways. First, the reading section of the TOEFL IBT is multiple choice. With only 4 possible choices, your odds are decent that you can find the right answer, much more so than if you had something that was short answer format, for example, where you have no starting point. If you can eliminate even one of these possibilities, obviously you are increasing your chances further at simply guessing the right answer. Unlike other exams that stack questions in a way that require you to explain what you've selected with a follow-up question like you might see on a different type of exam, the vocabulary questions on the TOEFL do not have any of these extra strings attached. But perhaps the biggest advantage in terms of formatting is not about how the question is set up, but how the word itself is presented. The TOEFL IBT provides all vocabulary words in context. You're not given a word on a screen and just asked simply for its meaning. Instead, the word is used inside a passage, giving you plenty of additional information that might be of critical value, the very thing you need in order to solve the question correctly. The strategies for solving these types of vocabulary and context questions will therefore come from both the question problem itself as well as the passage. If you are presented with a word that you don't know, the first thing you should do is determine if you can figure out something about the words based on its components. Do you recognize any prefixes, suffixes, or roots that the word is comprised of? Though this isn't a silver bullet, understanding even part of the word could prove useful. In fact, it could be enough to help you on a multiple choice test. As you know, I'm a huge advocate of memorizing roots for standardized tests because it's an efficient use of your time, more so than just having a random list of words. In fact, because I feel so strongly about it, I have an entire playlist that feature common roots that you can check out just by clicking on that button. Even if you do not recognize the root, knowing you have a prefix, especially one that indicates that there is some sort of lack of something or the opposite of something, common ones like on and miss, dis, im, ill, in, all of those are great to look for on the TOEFL because that can be key to eliminating some of your possible answer choices. How so? Because tone should be a huge factor you should look at if you're answering a question. Tone is key in these situations, whether we're looking at the question stem or the choices or the passage itself. Even if you do not recognize the word in the question, do you recognize any of the answer options? If so, are those positive, negative, or neutral in tone? If you can determine that the tone of the word in the question is positive, You should be able to eliminate any answer choices used to create a negative tone, and vice versa. Now, look at the word in the passage itself. Pretend that the sentence contains a blank instead of a vocabulary word. What would you want to fill in? Is that close enough to one of the answer choices, but maybe just not as academic of a way of saying it? Try to get the mood of the overall sentence. Is the sentence positive, negative, or neutral? I said it before, tone is so important. Same is true here. If you have an introductory phrase or an adverb, like unfortunately, frequently, shockingly, you can easily decide what the gist or the mood of that sentence is. Of course, make sure to look out for words that indicate a change from one part of the sentence to the next if you're going to use this strategy. Don't feel like you need to look at only the sentence that contained the word either. Very, very often, the sentence before or after will contain a direct synonym for the word that you are trying to figure out the meaning of. Remember, the TOEFL is designed to mimic real-life situations at the university level. And when it comes to reading passages, it is realistic to believe that there will be situations in which you run into a word that you don't already know. However, many textbooks, just like the TOEFL test, will give you these context clues to assist your understanding. This is a real-world skill, so mastering this will help you far beyond test day. Whether you are reading nonfiction in preparation for the TOEFL or fiction to simply increase your vocabulary, or perhaps your reading speed or endurance in an enjoyable way, of course, being able to deduce the meaning of a word from context is a valuable and practical skill. To recap, if you have a word you don't know, first, try to break down the word into its key components, those that you already know and recognize. 2, if no components are known, see if you can determine tone of the word in the question or the potential answer choices. Step 3, turn the sentence that contains the word in the passage into a fill in the blank and see what word you'd want to insert, paying particularly close attention to tone. And 4, look for synonyms in the sentences before or after. Could one of those words have fit in your blank, for example? And last but not least, 5, take an educated guess, having eliminated anything you can definitely rule out. Don't leave it completely blank. In other words, don't skip the question. Even if you aren't sure, there's not a guessing penalty, so make sure that you use this in your favor on test day. I always encourage my students to think like the test makers, and I want to leave you with this final thought. If you were trying to trick someone, how would you do it in these vocabulary and context situations? You might want to make the wrong answer choices look more enticing. How do they do this? Often they'll try to use a word that looks really similar, or they'll put in answer choice that you definitely won't recognize, that would hardly be on any of those lists, hoping that you'll bite, that you'll go after the word just because it's something that you don't know. If you feel pretty confidently that you've located the correct tone and all of the clues, don't go after that word that you don't know. It's probably just a red herring. Think like those test makers. Get inside their head, and you'll be far better off. These are the steps that you should take if you're trying to solve a vocabulary and context question on those reading sections of the TOEFL, especially if you're dealing with a word you do not know. Keep these tips in mind, and remember, just because you don't know the word doesn't mean you can't solve the problem. The TOEFL has given you multiple advantages in this way, so make sure that you capitalize on them. That's all I've got for today. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this video helpful, please be sure to give us a thumbs up below this video and subscribe so that way you get even more TOEFL tips and tricks. And follow on Instagram and Twitter at GetTestObsessed, or check us out at gettestobsessed.com. See you next time.